time over your lunch hour. Meeting is recorded. Yes. So, and yes, this meeting is being recorded. I'm really excited to be presenting about project management, how to manage projects, this two-part series, one here today and then another next week, same time. A little bit of background about me as people are kind of logging in. I actually was a grad student. I started grad school 30 years ago, and 2 months ago or so. I started in August of 1993 in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program, got my master's degree in 95. And I think at the time, I wanted to work for a college or university, and but I had no idea that I would be getting into project management. My degree was in Higher Education and Student Affairs, and I went to work for the Ohio Board of Regents, which is now called the Ohio Department of Higher Education. Now that's what it's called today. And at that time, I started working on an information system project, which again had absolutely nothing to do with the degree that I got at Ohio State, but it was something that I enjoyed doing, more on kind of the IT project management side of discipline, I guess. And we built a system called the Higher Education Information System that is actually still being used today. And it was a very successful project. And here it is, over 20 years later, went live in 1998. It's still being used to this day to distribute over $3 billion in instructional subsidy every year. And so it's something that I took a lot of pride in the team that was working on this at the time. We thought we were really good at managing projects and doing IT work at the time. And so we took on some other projects, working with some other partners, in some cases, some nonprofits. And some of those projects didn't go nearly as well. In fact, in one case, the project failed so epically that the chancellor of the Board of Regents at the time was yelling into a conference phone. I guess he was yelling because he didn't think the people in Cleveland could hear him on the other end of the phone. But we had such a epic failure with this project that it actually led us to kind of look at what were the reasons that the project failed. And we identified what some of those things were. And we decided at that time that almost all of us on the project team, and in fact, in that entire unit, needed to start looking at project management principles. We'd been doing it kind of on the fly with, we had done well enough with some of the efforts that we had worked on in the past. But what we found was that there were lots of things that were slipping along the way that if we had just spent a little bit of time looking at project management methodology, we would have avoided some of the mistakes that we made. And so what I'm kind of hoping today, and I'm excited about, is that here 30 years later, I get the opportunity to speak to graduate and professional students who are in a similar kind of situation to where I was earlier. And maybe you won't make some of the same mistakes that I made when you get the opportunity to work on some type of project. So and then another thing that I did was when I joined Ohio State University in 2009 in the Office of Institutional Research and Planning, which I'm still now a part of. At the time, I was hired for kind of two purposes. One was to coordinate reviews of academic programs. And so as a result of that, I have a kind of a working knowledge of a lot of the different programs that you are in, but then also that I was hired to help coordinate or manage the effort of moving from a quarter system calendar to a semester calendar. And we've been on that live now since 2012. But at the time, Ohio State had been on the quarter system for about 80 years. And so it was a pretty big effort to move from quarters to semesters. And so I'll be using some examples from that effort and some of the other projects that I've managed in the past to talk about and elaborate on some of the principles that we'll discuss today. So I'm really excited about this. And if you feel free, I've left my email address, and I'll post this at the end today, and I'll post it again next week, where you can write to me at johnson.1043@osu.edu. And I've also left my personal email in there as well. I love getting questions about managing projects. It's something that I geek out about and enjoy talking about. And if I don't know the answer, I love to investigate some of these things. There's a lot of information, good information out there on the web. So that's a little bit about me and my background. The principles that I'm going to talk about today and next week are from the Project Management Institute. So I have a PMP, a Project Management Professional Certificate from the Project Management Institute. And they use a dense book called the Project Management Body of Knowledge, and it is boring. But if you want to take a deep dive into some of these project management principles, you could go that route and maybe even look to get a PMP. I can talk about that maybe at the end today. There's some good reasons to get one, but there's some, not I wouldn't say bad reasons to get one as well, but I could discuss that with you if you're interested in looking at that. But the nice thing about the Project Management Institute is that it's made up of kind of governed by people from different industries. You could have people from the information technology sector. You could have people from the construction sector and all points in between, where they look at what are the kind of common aspects of a project, and then they define those things, put some kind of a framework around that. And in essence, what they've identified is like all projects share these type of characteristics. And so you can, it doesn't matter what kind of industry you're in, any type of project that you're going to approach will have some of these common elements threaded throughout it. And so this is the Project Management Institute is a really good resource for understanding and managing projects. So that's what I'm going to refer to, the way that they go about and the kind of framework that they use for managing projects. So now, and I think that Crystal may have mentioned that today and next week, this won't be too interactive. There's actually way too many of you to make it that way, which is great. But I'll be lecturing then for maybe a half hour to 45 minutes or until my voice gives out. And then, but what we'd like to do is if you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. There may be a point at which I'll take a small break and try to get look at the chat and see if there's some things that I can answer. It's possible that I will address the question that you asked later on, but at the end there will be a quiz. We'll do a poll at the very end to see how much of the material stuck, and then also it's only 3 questions and you're not being graded on it. And then we'll also, if we have, depending on how much time we have, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have, and we can just take it informally from there. So that's a little bit about the day today. Let's just launch in then to what we're talking about here. What is the definition of a project? According to the Project Management Institute, it's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So what are some of the characteristics of these projects? And by the way, I could have maybe brought this up. I hope that you have a project participant guide. I'll be referring to that, although we'll only go up to about page 5 today. But I hope that you have that. You can take notes if you want to print that out, or just take notes on your own. But I'll be referring to that today. So the project, the definition, the temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And then some of the characteristics about the projects are that they're goal oriented. So you have a bunch of people kind of moving towards a common objective, and then it's coordinated. And by coordinated, it means that there's many people working on this. It's not just something where personal time management, where you're trying to do this on your own. A project would involve several different people working as a team together, or project management would involve several different people. So it's coordinated undertaking, task of undertaking related activities to move towards that common goal. Projects have a finite duration. It has an end and a beginning. And if you haven't been on too many projects, maybe you've come across this, maybe you haven't, but lots of projects just go on and on and on and on and never seem to have an ending. And in that case, that's poor project management. Projects do need to end at a certain point in time where you close them off and say, okay, you release the resources and you have everybody go back to doing different types of work. So they are supposed to be finite. Projects are unique. No two projects are exactly alike. Even though you might be working on something that another team at another university, so in the field that I'm in institutional research, we talk to people, especially at the Big Ten, about, hey, how did you tackle this particular aspect, this particular problem? We're always having conversations with them, collaborating with them. But the way we tackle that particular issue is going to look a little bit slightly different than the way Indiana University would or Michigan would. And so no two projects, or even the project that I worked on that another department here at OSU might be working on, we're not going to do it in quite the same way. So each project is unique. It's not like an assembly line. It's not like an operation where you do this the same way every time. Each project is different. And so you have to approach it a little bit differently. And then the last characteristic of a project is that it's progressively elaborated. What does that mean? This is where the concept that you know more about what this project will look like, what the end result will be. You know a lot more about that the further you get into it. At the very beginning, you have an idea of, okay, we've got some kind of problem, we're trying to fix it. We have an idea of what the solution is going to look like, but that's day one. As you get deeper into this and start working on it, you might have a much better, a clearer picture of what the solution should look like. You might even, a quarter of the way into the project, realize that you're actually a little bit off track and that you need to, maybe you've learned some things and you say, you know what, this solution isn't as good as we originally thought. Maybe we need to rethink this. So progressive elaboration just means that you learn more about this particular project as you get deeper into that. It's important to understand that because as you get deeper into it, you may have to make some different choices than what you initially set out to do. So progressive elaboration, each project is unique. It has a finite duration, an end and a beginning. It's coordinated, and it's got a particular goal in mind. The project is actually a separate thing from the product, which is the end result of your project. And so that could be a number of different things. So with the quarter to semester conversion, that was a new calendar for the university. That was the product, a new calendar. If you're in the construction business, it could be the Sydney Opera House. That was its own project, took almost 14 years to complete, cost hundreds of millions of dollars to complete. For some of you, if you're in research, you're getting your PhD or you're doing some type of research for your master's thesis, that it could be the end result of the product could be a published paper. It could be a research proposal. It could be an instrument like a survey instrument to get the opinions of different people that you're studying. So the product is a separate but related to the project. One great thing about working on projects is that you get paired up with different people. So it's fun from that perspective. You're working on something that maybe you haven't worked on before. And so it's a great professional development opportunity. And you just get to a lot of times you get to learn about new technologies as a result as well. So working on projects as opposed to your typical kind of operations, the things that you do from day to day, is a lot of fun, a great learning opportunity. But it actually is very risky. So there's a group that for the IT industry, the Chaos Report from the Standish Group survey, the Standish Group, they survey the IT industry every year. And they note that only about a third, 37% of projects succeed, where everything that they set out to achieve, so all the objectives that they set out to achieve, was accomplished on time and within budget. So only about a third. 42% they say were challenged. That means that maybe it was delivered on time, but not all the functionality of the product was delivered. Maybe it was delivered above the cost, the budget that was allotted for it, or maybe it was delivered late. So 42% were challenged, and then 21% just failed outright, where they just said, okay, enough of this. We just need to cut our losses and be done with this. So chances are 1/3 of the projects that you will work on will not succeed. And in my experience, that's been about right. And in one case, it was an epic failure that caused us to rethink a lot of different things. And so before you entered this workshop, when you got the invitation, I believe that you were sent a survey link. And so I asked, like, what was your experience with managing projects and some of the challenges that you faced along the way? So what I've got here is the results from that survey. And it looks like the response rate is about the same as a lot of the other response rates that I get in other surveys, where it was somewhere around 20%, I think, of people responded that signed up for this. So what I have is in blue is the respondents from today's workshop, and then the orange is the people that have taken this workshop in the past. So a good chunk of you have not worked on particular projects, and that would make sense as graduate or professional students. Several of you, about the same number, a little bit more, have been part of a project team, and that's consistent with what I see in some of the workshops that I've done. A few of you have managed a project or two, and that's great. And then several of you actually have managed several projects. So we have a different kind of set of experiences in the room, in the virtual room today, and that's great. I asked also, what were some of the challenges that you faced when on these different projects? And so changing objectives and unclear objectives, and these are always the top. So you at the beginning of the project, you set out to accomplish something, and along the way, this is that idea of progressive elaboration, the objectives change. Somebody along the way says, now that we're further into this, we need to change course. Or maybe the objectives are actually unclear. And so at the beginning, maybe some people had an interpretation that we're going to deliver on this in this way, but other users of the product said, no, I think it's going to be this way. And so during the project, you're kind of arguing about what the end result is going to look like. So the objectives are unclear. A few of you noted that team dynamics stunk or were a challenge to the project. So sometimes team dynamics can take the form of two people just not getting along. So in a project that I worked on years ago, the quality assurance person said, "You have the worst business analyst I've ever worked with on this project." And the business analyst said, "You have the worst quality assurance analyst I've ever worked with on this project." So I had to manage the conflict between these two. And that was part of human resources management, we'll talk about in a bit. Running out of time, well, that happens a lot as well. So we just don't have enough time to accomplish all the things that are being asked of us. And then running out of money also comes up. There are some other things. And then a last one there, sponsor lost interest. This happens more often than you might think, where sometimes the person who has the great idea and is the force behind pushing on this to make things go, he or she loses interest because he's super busy. They're probably an executive. They've got a lot of different things on their mind. And so after a while, they just the support that they're showing to this particular pet project disappears over time. That happens. And so how do you keep your sponsor engaged is something we'll talk about a little bit in managing communications. So those are some of the things, the challenges and some of your own experiences. So today, what I want to talk about is understanding the project management framework according to the Project Management Institute. And that framework is made up of two groups, process groups and then knowledge areas. And we'll talk about those in a pretty big amount of detail. Although I'll say that when I teach this workshop, normally I actually teach this workshop over 4 hours. You're getting me in 2 hours in 2 installments this week and next week. In the 4-hour workshop, I would go into a couple of those process groups or a couple of those knowledge areas in a lot more detail. And then next week, same time, same place, we'll talk about the roles that make up the project team, the responsibilities of those people, and then some of the tools that you can use. So some of the forms some of the forms and documents that you can use to manage projects. So speaking of forms, why would you want to take what I'd call a formal approach to managing projects? Why don't you just go out there and get her done? This is kind of the approach that we took in the one project that just failed miserably. Well, there's a number of different reasons. One is that if you're not as familiar with, if you're entering new territory because of the technology, because of the content, because of the work group, you might want to rely actually on project management methodology to kind of move things forward, to get people moving in the same direction. The complexity of the project, how many moving parts are there? The size of the project and the size and the distribution of the team. So how many people are involved in this? How big is it? How big is this effort? Is it something that could get accomplished in a weekend? Then maybe just go do it. Or is it something that's going to take, in the semester conversion, it took 3 years to prepare for that. The length of the project, and then the dollar amount associated with it. As it gets more complex, as it gets more expensive, as it takes longer, you're going to want to rely on what I would call a formal project management methodology, where you have documentation along the way. You have forms that you fill out and you distribute to lots of different users along the way. So with that, let's get into the meat of this then. So the two things that we're going to talk about today are, it's called the project life cycle, or these process groups. And then we'll talk about the knowledge areas next. And this is on page 4 of your guide if you don't have that open. Okay. So the project life cycle is made up of initiating, planning, monitoring and controlling, executing, and closing. This is kind of what's happening chronologically over the life cycle of the project. Now, it's not completely chronological, because now ending does happen way after initiating, but during monitoring and controlling, you're kind of going back and forth between executing and planning. Mostly it's happening during the executing portion of things. So let me describe these. And I have them kind of defined on page 4 of your participant guide. Initiating, what does that mean? This is where you actually gain authorization using that quarter to semester conversion project. So I'd mentioned that OSU had been on the quarter system for, I think, like 80 years. And the different faculty and administrative groups had, most other universities in the country were on semesters. And as faculty came into the university, they'd say, why aren't we teaching at this 10-week sprint? Why aren't we lengthening this course out like a semester where I did my PhD or something like that? And so there was a lot of kind of studies and conversations about why we should or shouldn't move from quarters to semesters. But at no point did they actually gain authorization to actually go do it, to go make it happen. It wasn't until about 2009 that the chancellor of the Ohio Board of Regents at the time said, every public university and college in the state of Ohio will be on semesters to make it easier for students to transfer credit from one school to another. That was it. And we had to just do it at that point. Well, we had gained authorization from the Department of Higher Education. It was a mandate at that point. Now, again, there had been lots of conversations about this, but it was really just initiating. And I think it's helpful to differentiate between initiating and planning, because a lot of times you're just talking about the problem. As my boss's boss says, at Ohio State, we're very good at admiring a problem. And that's kind of project initiation. It's not until we actually say we're going to do something about it that we move into planning. Planning is where you define the objectives of the project. What do you want to get out of it? What is this supposed to do? Define those objectives and then refine them. So if we're going to build a house, we're going to build it out of, are we going to build it out of straw, brick, or wood? What's it going to be? With the quarter to semester conversion, we were looking at, well, what is a semester? How is it different than a quarter? So we had to go to the Higher Learning Commission, which is our accrediting body, that says, well, a semester, according to us, can only be between, no fewer than 14 weeks, but no more than 18 weeks. Well, okay, so now we've got to define and refine what it is, what we mean by a semester here. How many weeks is it going to be? And then we had to decide what's our best course of action. What's best for Ohio State University overall? That's where we went from initiating, we gained authorization, to planning, where we're defining and refining those objectives, project objectives, and then selecting that best course of action. At a certain point, you decide to move forward and execute. And during that, you're actually working on the aspects that you set out to do during the planning and during the initiating. This is where the Project Management Institute is really helpful, and this is one reason that we don't spend a lot of time in these workshops talking about executing, because so much of it is like, depending on if you're on an IT project, execution looks a little bit different than it might look for construction, or some type of procedure or project within hospital administration. So kind of execution may look different from industry to industry or discipline to discipline, but it's made up of actually working on the tasks that you set out during the planning portion, the planning process group. While you are executing, then you are actually going back and looking at the plan and monitoring and controlling, saying, okay, we set out with all of these objectives. Are we doing those? We said that we're only going to take 6 months to complete this. Looking at the schedule, are we on schedule? You're monitoring the plan that you set out and saying, oh my gosh, we're behind schedule. We have to do something. We have to react. We have to make some changes. So during that time, you're ensuring that project objectives are being met, but then taking corrective action. So you're going back and forth kind of between executing and planning, but it's happening during executing. It's not that you may have to go back to planning to revise some documents and some of the objectives, but monitoring and controlling is happening while you're executing. You're just looking back at the plan, but it happens while you're executing. And then the last process group is closing. And this is where you think about if you've ordered something from a drive-through and you drove off with your food, and then you open up the stack and you find that you ordered a filet of fish and you got chicken McNuggets. Whatever it is, you didn't do proper project closure. Project closure means you check the bag while you're in the drive-through to make sure that you actually got what you ordered. Closure is about making sure that did you actually achieve the benefits that you set out during the project initiation and project planning? Did you, so that could include looking at what's called a project charter. We'll talk about that a little bit next week, and where you've defined that, you looked at, okay, this, according to our project charter, we're going to do this because we expect that we're going to save money as a result at the end of this project. Well, during closure, you look at, okay, is this setting us up for saving money later on? So project closure means you don't just collapse in a heap and say, I hope I never have to do that again. But instead, you look back at the project plan and make a determination as to whether you actually achieved the results that you set out to achieve. So that's the project life cycle or the process groups. in a nutshell. Now we're going to kind of end the day talking about these knowledge groups, or these knowledge areas. So we have integration, scope, time, cost, risk, quality, communications, human resources, procurement, and then stakeholder management. These are all kind of management areas. And these, there's a lot of interrelationships between these. In fact, that's the first one. Integration management just recognizes that there's lots of moving parts in a project. There's a lot of objectives that are actually competing against one another, and that somebody is going to have to coordinate all aspects of the project, make sense of the competing priorities, and make sure that the project is still moving forward. The project manager is usually the person who's responsible for integrating the whole thing. Scope management is where you're ensuring that all of the work is getting done, but only the work of the project. You're not doing a whole bunch of extra work, wasting people's time. If you think about the idea of a scope, so if you have a, so I'm going to let somebody in here. If you have a a site where you're trying binoculars, where you're trying to look at something off in the distance, you're seeing that within the scope of the binoculars. You can only see this much. Scope means that you're kind of setting a target and defining the objectives of the project. What is it that you hope to achieve? All of the goals and objectives, identifying what kind of features and functions are going to be in the product. If you think about from an IT project management perspective, that maybe you're going to create some type of new purchasing system, and here are all the things that this purchasing system needs to have according to the users that you've discussed this with. So scope management talks about like gathering requirements from different users or different people, different stakeholders who are going to be impacted by this project, or people who are going to use this product. What do you hope to get out of it? What does it need? What does this product need to do for you? They help you define those objectives, and then you set out on how you're going to achieve those objectives. So you're setting the kind of boundaries of the project, and it also means that you make it explicit, and this would be in something either called a project charter or a scope statement, where you say, this is what we're going to accomplish. There have been some other things that users and different user groups talked about, and maybe even the sponsor and stakeholders talked about that they'd like to get out of this, but we've decided that we're only going to focus on this because of the resources that we have right now, or the time limitations that we have right now, and we're only going to accomplish this. And we actually, when we're managing scope, we set out and we say, these are the things we decided explicitly that we're not going to do at this time. Maybe at a later date, we will do objectives 1 through 3, but you make it very clear to everybody up front, we're not doing 1, 2, 3. We're doing 4, 5, and 6 because those are our priorities, but we're not doing 1, 2, and 3. And then you communicate that out to all of the users and the stakeholders and the sponsor to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Without defining the scope well, that's where those objectives can either be very unclear or they can change over time. Scope management, in fact, one of the interesting things, and I can't do a show of hands here, or maybe you could do a reaction with a thumbs up or something like that. How many of you have heard of scope creep? Oh, all right, thank you. We've got a few people who have come across scope creep. Okay, yes, okay. Yes, so this was a new term for me when, again, I got out of graduate school and was working on this project called the HEI project. And a veteran business analyst, project manager, was saying, sounds like scope creep to me. And I was like, what is this? Over time, though, I realized that scope creep just means that, you can see from the comic there, is it too late to add 4 floors? uh, again, progressive elaboration. As you get further on into this project, you realize that, maybe it would be nice if we added this feature, talking to the users, this would be a great idea. And you know what? It is a great idea. It would make this product so much better if we just added these couple bells and whistles. Absolutely. Totally agree. But you have to recognize with managing scope is that the more you add, and this is where this quadruple constraint comes in. If you add to scope, then the project then just becomes bigger. It's rare that you're going to add new features and functions and it's actually going to save time on the final product and delivering the final product. If you add to the scope, more than likely it's going to add to the time. If you add to the scope, it's going to add to the cost. If you add to the scope and try to keep time and cost the same, you're probably going to have, it'll probably have a negative impact on quality. And so any impact, anytime you want to increase scope, you have to recognize that time, quality, and cost are going to be impacted. And so this is why managing scope, in fact, this is probably the area that as I teach on this particular topic, I spend the most time on scope management because it's what really sinks projects more than anything else. Okay. The other ones are a little maybe easier to understand, where you've got something like time management. This is where you set a schedule based on a realistic set of estimates. So you determine based off of the scope and the plan and all that, you say, well, all of these tasks are going to be needed to accomplish this. How much time does each task take? How much time will this entire thing take? You create these estimates of how long the project will take, and then you manage to those estimates. And then if you have to go back to maybe your sponsor and say, well, it looks like we need more time to get to accomplish this. So that's what time management, easier to understand. Cost management, similar to time management, where you've got finite resources and maybe you have a budget that's set. You set that budget though based off of you've managed the scope, you figured out how big this project, how long it's going to take, how big it's supposed to be, how long it's going to take, and then you figure from that schedule you determine how much you think it will actually cost. You create some estimates of the costs, and then you manage to that budget from there. Or maybe you have to negotiate for more money. I think I didn't mention this, but I managed projects for AEP for a brief stint of time with a IT consulting company, and we built into our project plan a 20% cushion over or under, just because we knew that all we knew about estimates is that they're wrong. Estimates are just an estimate, but is it going to actually be correct? Probably unlikely. Okay. With after cost management, then you're also managing risks. And next week, I'm going to talk about a form called a risk log that you can use to help identify risks. But with managing risks, that's what you're doing. You're identifying risks up front. What could possibly go wrong? What could affect the project or the product itself that we need to make a plan? It's either likely to happen, or that if it does happen, that it will have such a negative consequence to project success that we need to plan a risk mitigation strategy for that. Let me give you an example. When we moved from quarters to semesters, we decided to go live not in the autumn of 2020 or 2012, but in the summer of 2012. Why did we do that? Well, we thought if something well, let me give you an example. Columbus State Community College, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but they implemented a new student information system in 2004. They went live in the autumn of 2004, where it was going live for the autumn 2004 class schedule. Something went wrong, as IT projects, as it sometimes happens. And so students could not register for courses for the autumn 2004 term. their enrollments declined like 25% because so many students just couldn't get into the classes and then just decided they weren't going to try anymore. We decided at Ohio State when we went live with semesters that we weren't going to make that same kind of mistake. We figured rather than go live in autumn of 2012 when 60,000 students are enrolled, if something were to go wrong with either a system or whatever, it'd be better if we failed earlier in the summer of 2012. It gave us less time to accomplish everything, but it mitigated the risk that if something went wrong, it only impacted a mere maybe 8,000 students instead of 60,000 students. So we managed risk by moving the timeline up. Now that created some other problems, but I think it avoided something going horribly wrong. So risk management is something that you need to plan for as well. Quality management is about making sure that the project has met all of the requirements that you kind of set out for it. So that means kind of the checklist at the end of the project where you're going through and saying, okay, now did we accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish? That may mean that you actually, if it's like an IT, it's a purchasing system, like I mentioned, that you actually have a quality assurance analyst, maybe a dedicated person who goes through and says, okay, we said it was going to do this. I'm going to do a test for it. It was going to do this. I'm going to do a test for it. So you actually test all of those things. So quality assurance can be about the product, the end result, but then you can also have quality management around the project itself. So this is where you kind of have this, where I was talking about this kind of formal project management methodology. This is the way we approach things at my unit. So when I was at AEP, they had a very strict way of approaching managing projects. There's a lot of forms. You had to fill those out. And then I had to sit down with the quality assurance analyst who said, did you do this form? Did you do this form? On that topic, if you're really interested in quality management, there's a good book called The Checklist Manifesto, written by a surgeon, and he talks about the ways that the operating room is prepared in advance, and they actually go through a list, a checklist to make sure that everything has been prepared in advance for the surgery. So that's quality management. Then you've got communications management. So this is making sure that this is kind of related to stakeholder management. So I'll kind of get into both a little bit. Stakeholder management is identifying the stakeholders up front, people that are downstream of this particular effort, and they could be impacted by this. So with the quarter to semester conversion, we knew that students were going to be impacted. And so if students were already enrolled at Ohio State, they were a sophomore, maybe they were a freshman when they started at Ohio State, and they knew that we were going to go to semesters a couple of years later, they were going to have to change their course taking pattern. We had to communicate with them about what that was going to look like because they were going to be impacted by that, potentially negatively. Although actually at the end of it, nobody was impacted negatively. Everybody who should have graduated on time did. We had to talk, stakeholders were the faculty who were teaching the courses and all the graduate teaching assistants who were teaching courses as well. They had to refine the objectives for each course. Instead of being taught on a 10-week kind of sprint, it was lengthened out to 14 weeks. So we had to communicate to the people who are going to be the instructors and identify them. We had to identify, the stakeholders included landlords who were going to have leases that normally under quarters, people showed up to OSU. Let's see, the fall quarter started mid-September. Now it starts in August. And so as a result of that, we had to tell the landlords that, hey, you're going to have to change the terms of your leases as a result of the cycle of when students are going to come in and out of Columbus, Ohio. So we had to identify the stakeholders, what's their interest in all of this. And then we had to set up a communications plan for each of those stakeholders to make sure that they had the messages that they needed. In some cases as well, communication management, that can include storing the records about the project, kind of for the institutional memory. So I was contacted by the university archivist about, well, here's some of the plans, here's some of the documents that we want to hang on to for posterity. So you've got communications and stakeholder management. Managing your human resources, this is about identifying the team and the type of experts that you need for this type of project. So in some cases, you might need IT specialists, you might need systems administrators, you might need database administrators. It kind of depends on the type of project that you're pursuing. But somebody, usually the project manager, is out there trying to select the talent needed to accomplish the goals that you're setting out to achieve, and then managing conflict between the team members. So that could be that there's a personality conflict because the two people just don't get along, but it could be also that there's two different technical approaches to manage to get to this end goal, and you have to decide among your human resources what your approach is going to be. And if there are differing opinions, making sure that we say, once we've set how we're going to do it, that we're going to follow through on that. So human resources management is another aspect of this. And then the last one is procurement management, where you might actually, have contracts on this particular project. So you have to buy software, you have to buy physical things for whatever it is, if you need lab equipment. And so you contract with an external vendor, or you're contracting with different resources, maybe a consulting company to do some of your work. And managing those contracts is part of procurement management. And a lot of projects use kind of external labor to accomplish the project. So those are the knowledge areas and the process groups. And so when you look at those two together, the Project Management Institute have put together here, they identify these activities that are kind of happening simultaneously within the process groups, or the kind of chronology of what's happening, and then within those different knowledge areas. So if we take a look at that time management, and I'm sorry, this is really small font here. It's a little more clear on page 3 of your participant. Oh, no, sorry, not page 3. Page 5 of your participant guide, I hope. And in that case, time management, there's not much in the way of initiating, but when you're planning, you're looking at defining those activities. You're setting up the sequence, which activity is going to precede or follow other activities. You estimate how long it's going to take for each of those activities, and then you develop that schedule. And then when you're executing, it's actually just happening. And then monitoring and controlling, you're going back and looking at the schedule and maybe taking some corrective action because you realize that we have spent too long on these first 3 tasks, and we need to hurry up the next 3 tasks, otherwise we're going to be late. So that's a little bit about the kind of activities and the relationship between the process groups and the knowledge areas. Now, at the beginning, I promised that there would be a quiz. And so I'd like Crystal. Yeah, Crystal, I think has the quiz, has the poll not appeared for anybody? If not, go please take it 3 questions. I just want to run through the results with you. And then what we'll do is, with the time that remains, I'll kind of go through the answers to the quiz. And then you can put your questions in the chat guide, or in the chat. And then I'd say I can stay here. I can't stay here all day, but I can stay here until 1:30 if you like. I don't know how Crystal feels about that, but I can, if you have questions about some of the things that I discussed here today, about the knowledge groups and the process, or the knowledge areas and the process groups, I'd be happy to talk with you a little bit about that. Next week, the plan is that we'll talk about the roles and responsibilities of the project team. So it's the project manager, the project team, the stakeholder, the sponsor. And then we'll also talk about a couple of the forms that some of the most common forms that can be helpful for some of these, for managing projects. Okay, so let's see. 71% participation, need a few more people to answer, and then I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. You're not being graded on this. 80%. Okay, I think that's good. Okay. Now I'm going to share the results. And does that show? Actually, I could use your help here. I don't know if it shows up on your screen or not. It shows up on my screen. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to get, okay, so in which process group happens simultaneously with executing? So it's monitoring and controlling is what's happening with executing. And I think I will say that as I kind of look at this, it's a little confusing because the monitoring and controlling arrows go back to planning. And so you do kind of go back to planning, but it's really that monitoring and controlling is happening. You've already set out your plan and now you're executing on that. And then you're kind of going back, looking at the plan and maybe making changes to the plan if you decide that you need to make some changes. Okay, so but it's monitoring and controlling. Second question, in which process group you gain authorization? Yes, initiating. That's when you actually, somebody says, yes, we're going to do that. And now you start the planning. Okay. Third question, which knowledge area ensures that the project include all the work and only the work of the project? Yeah, so it's scope management. So most of you got that right. Again, this is where you're defining and refining, you're setting the kind of scope or the boundaries of the project, and then it's making sure that you're not doing a whole bunch of rework or extra work, but only the absolute minimum amount of work that needs to be done to accomplish the project objectives. Okay, so thank you for your participation on that. What I'm going to do is, that's the end of our time here today. My voice is hoarse. I'm going to drink some water. And at this point, how about this is, you're welcome to either log off, finish your lunch in silence, or if you would like, I can stay on, like I said, until like 1:30 or so. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. And then I hope to see you all next week at noon, where we're talking about roles and responsibilities and some of the forms. You're welcome. Megan, I see you have your hand up.
I do, thank you. I actually took your summer course that you were teaching a few summers ago online.
Oh.
So I don't think we actually got to officially meet because it was asynchronous, but I was really excited to see you were doing this. Are there any, like, I always get all these ads on the internet for different programs that offer project management certification, like Cornell has an online one, like there's all these different, so I mean, are there any programs that are better, and I use that word, lightly, than others?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. And so is the goal, Megan, to be get a PMP?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. And everybody, you're welcome. Great to hear from you. So I will say that I took something from Rita Mulcahy, and I'll drop that in the chat. And I think it's like rmc.com or something like that. I may have misspelled her name, and it may not even be a her anymore. It really may be like an entire industry, because I think that her materials were so successful. So when you take the PMP exam, and by the way, it's not rocket science. And in fact, the PMP, what's different about it is that you have to think not in the way that you might approach managing projects. You have to think in the way that Project Management Institute tells you that you're supposed to manage the project. And so there are a couple things where you're like, I don't know if I'd do it that way, but if you want to pass the test, you do it that way. But the PMP, if I'm correct, they arranged the course material kind of along the lines of those knowledge areas: risk management, time management, human resources, things like that. And so among those, you need to pass, I think, to pass the PMP, you have to get like 60% higher or higher on all of those sections. Yeah, I think that's it, something like that. I could be wrong on that proportion. So the Rita Mulcahy material at the time that I took it, it consisted of, they sent me a CD-ROM. So that gives you a hint as to when I took that, and flashcards. And so I would drive around. I had two young kids. I would drive around and I just had that CD playing all the time. And then that CD-ROM had also had practice tests, and it wasn't online. You didn't do it. You didn't log in online. You did your practice test on the CD-ROM. And her advice was, don't even sign up to take the exam until you've passed my practice test with 80% in all the sections. And so by doing that, what I recall is that normally when I sit down for a test, I'm nervous and I can't sleep the night before or something like that. After doing the Rita Mulcahy stuff, I was so confident that I was going to ace that exam, and I did. And so again, not because I'm so smart. Her stuff just prepared me so well. I wish that I'd done that for my GRE. Good gosh, I would have gone to Harvard, I swear. So anyhow.
All right, so you're saying that basically you can use these materials to prepare, or another way that people go about preparing is registering for like courses that, but
boot camp.
Yeah, but you can also use, I have it pulled up. I found it on Amazon. So you're saying that you can also like self-study as well, is kind of what I'm hearing.
You can, yeah. In fact, you could go to the library and get a lot of that material yourself. The main thing is that then I would say is that like I wouldn't rely on me. If I were you, I wouldn't rely on Jay Johnson's lectures to go get a PMP, because that's not going to get you there. You really need, like, well, I should say you could use the PMBOK, the most recent edition of the PMBOK, and study that. But I really think that those boot camps, although they cost you something, are going to prepare you it's laser focused on get the PMP. And then by studying for it, I will say that I became a much, much better project manager than I'd ever been as a result of that.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Rashida, thank you for putting the link in there. I thought that stuff was great. I see there's a question about software. Yeah, this is the fun thing. So Pedro, and I appreciate that if you're at the library that you're not speaking out, being polite there. So yes, Monday, Asana, Trello, they have the kind of Kanban way of looking at things. Those are really handy. There's a product called Smartsheet that the university has a license for. So I think that if you are, if you are in a department, as a GRA or something like that, and you're working in a particular department, it's possible that you could get a license for some of these different project management software. And some of these things are kind of just kind of ways to organize work, and so you don't have to use them for managing projects. But the Smartsheet, Microsoft has something called Microsoft Project. That's software that I used when we were COVID response back in 2020. The university was using Smartsheet to manage the kind of all aspects of managing the how are we going to respond to this crisis. And Smartsheet was extremely easy to use. It's a lot like a spreadsheet, like Microsoft Excel, but then you could create Gantt charts and other things. So I really liked Smartsheet. It was very easy to use. Microsoft Project is a little harder to use, but it has some brilliant features in it. Monday.com, I'm not familiar with. Asana, I have Trello kind of for my own, or I used it for a while for my own personal kind of tasks and stuff, kind of my own time management. But yeah, I don't really get into those in this because we're kind of agnostic with regard to, because part of that depends on, the department that you're in, and if they organize themselves with Trello, then you should probably use that for managing projects. Let me do one thing also. With the university, we have a license for Microsoft Teams, and Teams has apps, and I've played around a little bit with embedding some of those into Teams folders. I would say that since you're here at Ohio State and Ohio State has Teams, I would probably explore that somehow, integrating what you want to do with Teams. PMP certification after taking the PM class at Glenn College. So I've taught, Megan Loverhead, in her question, she took I taught that project management course at the John Glenn College of Public Affairs a couple summers ago. It was asynchronous. That's a really good, much deeper dive into managing projects. I don't know if it would be something that would prepare you for the PMP certification. And this is kind of to that point of, there's a kind of a logical textbook way of managing projects. And then to get your PMP certification, you have to answer the questions the way the Project Management Institute tells you to answer the questions. And it may disagree with the author or your own experience. And there's a reason for it. There's a logic to it. But I would really recommend figuring out how to get somebody to pay for a boot camp for you. Hopefully, maybe you have education funds or stuff like that. But that's how I would go about it. I wouldn't just take it on my own, and I wouldn't just take it after the class that's taught at Glenn College. It's nothing against the class that's taught at Glenn College. It's the right kind of material, but the PMP it's technical. It's the way they approach it. Does one have to be a formal certified project manager to lead projects? Absolutely not. You can lead projects without the project management certificate. Again, the way I say it is that as a result of studying for and obtaining the PMP, I'm a better project manager than what I was before. It doesn't mean I'm a better project manager than somebody else, because there's lots of people, some people are just really smart and they can figure these things out. But I will say that understanding this framework, the knowledge areas, and the process groups is going to be just understanding that. I wish I had that kind of even vocabulary when I started working on projects after grad school, or actually during grad school. And so no, I would say that you don't have to, but I would say that if it's a professional, so if you're, for instance, if it's you and a team of graduate students trying to work on a project together as a course, then that's one thing, and you're kind of maybe the project lead on that. But if it's something that you're being paid to do, and now there's an expectation that you're going to manage this project, one thing is if it's outside of your set of responsibilities as a GA or something like that, definitely I would I'm not going to say push back, but I would ask whoever is asking you to lead the project effort, what kinds of resources are available to me to manage the project? Can I take time to take this class? Can I take time to, if we take a deeper dive through the John Glenn College of Public Affairs, the MAPS program, I do this over 4 hours. There's more interactive. You could say, hey, for, I don't know, $250 or something like that, it's possible that I could, could I do this workshop and get a deeper dive into this topic? Because otherwise you're kind of going out and doing it on your own, and you may make some missteps. Not that that's the worst thing in the world, but anyhow, so I would maybe go back to who's ever asking you to lead the project and see what kinds of resources that person could make available to you. There is, I want to find this. If you're in the health sciences, sorry, I want to look at this, get this right. The Howard Hughes Institute. So a practical guide to scientific management from the Howard Hughes, and I may have this in the notes at the end of the participant guide, but that they have a really good kind of like, how to lead a lab and a whole bunch of different things, and they go into managing projects in one of the chapters. Sorry, I don't have it in my materials here, but follow up with me and I can send that to you, whoever's asking. Let's see, okay, OSU, that's great, Tyler. OSU has a lot of PMP study books. That's great. I'm glad. Yeah, don't pay for it if you don't have to. It's that boot camp was expensive. I did not pay for it. Actually, the nice thing is because that one project was such an epic failure that our unit got about $50,000 to bring in a consultant to lead us through how my projects should be managed. And then we also we had funds to go out and get our PMP. And then, like so many other good employees, a lot of people got their PMP and then left to get a higher paying job. Okay. Rita Mulcahy, recording, yes. Okay, great. Any other questions? Tune in for next week. We'll go over roles and responsibilities and the some of the forms, and hopefully have some more time to discuss this afterwards. All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody. I've enjoyed this, and good luck with the rest of your day. Crystal, I think I'm going to log out.